With a title like this, you might think I've gone insane. But no, at least not yet. I don't think I'm insane. It's more a question of reflecting upon things I've heard this past year as the year is rapidly drawing to a close. And most recently, a series of comments I heard from a very well-known streamer who claimed that incels effectively didn't exist. And this is more or less a direct quote that 90% of men, this is a meme, but it's true, and it's what he said, if they just got a haircut, cleaned up, shaved, that they would be sevens, at least sevens on the attractiveness scale. So 90% plus of men, if they just took a few easy, non-invasive, non-surgical steps, could be sevens. Now, the logic of this should be pretty clear. Even if it's not a normal distribution curve, you still need to consider that the likelihood that 90% of any population could be a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10 is a bit absurd, because 5 is average, and, well, it's just logical. Most people are going to fall within the average. But I think ultimately he was arguing more about the potential to become a 7 than anything else. But there really is this question, do incels exist? Are they a thing? And in some sense, they definitely are. The problem is that the definition of incel is, let's be perfectly honest, not entirely clear. There's an old school definition, there's a definition other people will give it, and everything in between. So really what we're talking about, on some level, is a taxonomic question. So if I start talking about giraffes, we know what a giraffe is. There happen to be a number of subspecies on the African continent. You have the reticulated giraffe, for example, in Kenya and Ethiopia. You have the South African giraffe that, unsurprisingly, lives in South Africa. You have the West African giraffe, and so on and so forth. They're all subspecies of a giraffe, but they're all giraffes. There's no dispute about what a giraffe is. But when we're talking about sociocultural definitions, and that really is what an incel is, a socioculturally defined thing, then it's not entirely clear. You talk to some people, they say, well, an incel, this is the basic definition, I guess, is someone who's never been able to find intimacy, never have sex, never had a relationship. Okay. Then some other people expand the definition, and they say, oh, well, actually, an incel is somebody who hasn't had sex in X number of years. Or an incel is someone who's never had a proper relationship, or take your pick, right? For any one of these categories, there will be men for whom these categories are appropriate in one sense or another. But again, the definition is always shifting. Of course, there are quite literally men out there that no matter what they do, they can't get laid, whether it's for reasons of physical appearance, social awkwardness, some kind of mental or psychological disability, or a combination of all of the above. These men exist. They always have existed. Other men go through massive dry spells and droughts where they have hardly any female contact, but at some point in time they do have relationships, and they were having sex. So I think ultimately, it sounds a little bit cheesy and awkward. The question isn't a simple one. And I hate using the term meta because it's a totally abused and overused term these days. We need to have a meta conversation about X. But I do think this is kind of, and I apologize, I really despise the word, a meta-cultural, meta-social phenomenon. Because everyone is not in agreement about what it really means. And I think this is really where it matters and counts. How people feel about it subjectively in their own lives of involuntary celibacy or long dry spells or droughts, that's going to be relative and subjective. There are for sure men out there who probably have never attracted a lot of women that might fall under the rubric of incel, but they've never really given it much thought because they were preoccupied with something else. Maybe they were obsessed with engineering or physics or butterfly collecting. Who knows? So how an individual reacts to his status, I think, in this quote-unquote meta discussion is just as important as the actual classification. It's just not entirely clear. Obviously, there are some things that we can say to sort of delimit the discussion. So a guy who's clearly an 8+, who's 6'2", who's smashing left and right on a whim, who has girls chasing after him, begging him to engage in threesomes with him, that by definition cannot be an incel, right? But on the opposite end, as I said, is it a guy who's never had any experience, no intimacy, no sex, a guy who's had a little? It really depends. And I think more importantly, it really comes down to the impact of that status and how it feels to you as an individual man. I think that if I were a young man in the current meta, I'd probably be a lot more disturbed than I was in my heyday 20, 25 years ago. But because you can't really compare the two. But I also have met guys, talked to guys who are, you could say, in that incel bubble, and they're honestly not that bothered by it. And this is this idea that a lot of people can't grasp, that how people feel about things, how people react to things, it's not universal. People have different reactions to things. They feel differently about different things. And it's possible to be quote-unquote incel and not to be super bothered by it. Just like it's possible to be incredibly bothered by it and everything in between. So in the truest sense of the word or the phrase, to answer the question, do incels exist? Of course they do. It's not as if this streamer was claiming that 90% of guys could just become sevens by losing a little weight, getting a haircut, and wearing nice clothing. He didn't even mention the gym, which, at least according to the academic studies, tells us is the most important thing you can do to improve your sexual appeal. And there is that blindness. A lot of people, it's a perpetual issue, cannot extrapolate from their own situations onto others. They think, well, I'm doing well because I did X, Y, Z, whatever. Someone else can do the same and he'll get the same results. It's very, very common. I think independently of where we delimit the term or what the actual meaning of incel is, it's not defined or classified in terms of its taxonomy compared to, say, as I said, a giraffe or a lion or a tiger. It is sociocultural ultimately. These people exist, but I think ultimately it's down to social media and the presence of the internet. Without the internet, no one would have heard of these guys. There'd be no common ground for them. So, of course they exist. It's really just a question of to what degree, and there are good stats on it. It's also obviously a question of your definition of what an incel is. Generally speaking, I like to stick to the definition of a man who's never experienced sexual intimacy, never experienced a relationship, never had any real sort of physical contact with a female. I would say that's probably the definition of an incel. So, in accordance with that definition, yes, I do think such men exist. I think the numbers are probably going to grow, and it's probably going to get worse. I don't think it's going to be something like an incel apocalypse, as some people claim. I know Bathrobe Man, for the sake of his own propaganda, claims that. I don't think it's going to happen because people are sufficiently anesthetized, and I just don't see it. There'll be no incel apocalypse, incel uprising. It will be just misery, sorrow, and continuous suffering for such individuals. Assuming, as I said, they're bothered by their status. They might not be. But the idea that such people just don't exist is laughable and obviously not true. As always, thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like, share, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out next time. Take care. May the gods watch over you. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.